Hi there. We all know that Phaedrus referred to the high country of the mind throughout Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. And I think Phaedrus is inspired by two things. One is Einstein's Temple of Science, which evokes an image of a temple high, maybe on the top of a mountain or even suspended in heaven or in the clouds. And the other is the Beartooth Absaroka area near Yellowstone Park in Montana, and the Beartooth Pass, which is a mystical elevation at the end of a dramatically winding and elevating highway. And it is here that he goes to ponder metaphysics, a process whose metaphorical parallel is the high country of the mind. So I want to read something from Nietzsche's biography, Ecce Homo, and I was really blown away by something he said. First, that his greatest work, in his opinion, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, is the loftiest book on earth, literally a book of mountain air. And about the mountain air, he says, "He who knows how to breathe the air of my writings knows that it is an air of the heights, a bracing air. One must be made for it. Otherwise, the danger is no small one of catching cold in it. The ice is near, the loneliness is tremendous. But how peacefully all things lie in the light, how freely one breathes, how much one feels beneath oneself. Philosophy, as I've understood and lived it hitherto, is the voluntary living among ice and high mountains, the seeking out of all things curious and questionable in existence, everything that has been put under a ban by morality hitherto." So in a lot of ways that kind of reminds us of the way that Phaedrus, or Robert, remembers Phaedrus's relationship with the high country of the mind and the high country itself. So I haven't read much of Zarathustra, but I can see in Ecce Homo that it's likely this high country is referred to again and again. And of course, Zarathustra lives in the mountains for 10 years before coming down and disseminating the wisdom that he has garnered in that high plane. It's fascinating what Nietzsche says about what has been put under a ban by morality hitherto, since what Phaedrus is doing in these two books is formulating a new metaphysics, and in Lila, a completely new understanding of morality based on these metaphysics. That there is much consonance between what we pragmatically perceive as moral and even are told is moral in our, that we have garnered from our mythos, and what the metaphysics of quality system yields as moral is correlated. But neither Pirsig or Nietzsche is operating exactly within established patterns of social moral value. Obviously, in the metaphysics of quality, they would be operating within their mythos, but both of them are mythos-busting brujos. And certainly, they may operate within the established patterns of social moral value in the sense that they probably aren't going to go out and kill someone, and they're basically polite guys. But what they're doing is transcending these patterns of value with a complete shift of the perception of morality. So what Nietzsche calls this is transvaluation. In the case of Nietzsche, it is a conceptual shift. It is life-affirming. Maybe it's something like arete. It is certainly counter to Christianity. And in the case of Pirsig, it's quality, or rather the understanding that quality is the driver and creator of the universe and of this moral system, that the metaphysics of quality is a moral system. The difference primarily philosophically is that Pirsig's philosophy is metaphysics, and Nietzsche, as far as I can tell, is a philosophical worldview more bounded in material reality. I don't think he is exactly trying to formulate a metaphysics, although from what I understand about Nietzsche, he did just about everything. So maybe I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. Maybe those of you who know Nietzsche better can point to where Nietzsche is trying to formulate a metaphysics. I always like to talk about Pirsig's traps in chapter 26 of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I find it an endless source of tips for how to live a quality existence, or at least to try to conceive of how to do that, especially in this very strange day and age. So I want to talk about one notion of a value trap. So if you regret something you did wrong or envy something that you can't have, then you're stuck in a value trap because you think that that thing that you long for, that thing that you regret or that thing you can't have, is better than what you have now, and the outcome that has happened to you by making these choices instead of that choices. And what happens to you in this value trap is you get a preconceived notion of the only possible thing that could be better than what you've got. There's a real tendency with regret and envy to very much conceptualize that thing that you're lacking. But of course, this thing is not true, because there are many, many, many things possible that are better. And if you get stuck in this imaginary scenario of this thing is better, then you're not going to see these numerous possibilities. So getting unstuck is very difficult, though, because it requires you to recognize what you're doing and emotionally detach in that moment of longing. So my advice would be, if you feel these things, envy or regret, understand that you're kind of being trapped by something very conceptual. And to be able to detach from that longing is on the road to getting unstuck. So the value trap and getting unstuck from conceptual reality reminds me of a discussion in the meetup last Saturday, and we were talking about this passage in chapter 12 where Robert is telling us how Phaedrus left Benares Hindu University in India, and he left no closer to enlightenment than when he started. The problem is he could not extract himself from his rational way of thinking. So let me read this passage real quick. But one day in the classroom, the professor of philosophy was blithely expounding on the illusory nature of the world for what seemed the 50th time, and Phaedrus raised his hand and asked coldly if it was believed that the atomic bombs that had dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were illusory. The professor smiled and said yes, and that was the end of the exchange. Within the traditions of Indian philosophy, that answer may have been correct, but for Phaedrus or anyone else who reads the newspapers regularly and is concerned with such things as mass destruction of human beings, that answer was hopelessly inadequate. He left the classroom, left India, and gave up. So in the meetup, I was trying to argue that this Eastern attitude is one of harmony and conflict avoidance. But this didn't go very far, obviously. I kind of got caught in a value trap because the other members easily pointed out to me all the wars that have occurred in the East. And of course, what I was really saying, this is the value trap I got stuck in, is that romantic mystic quality is better than classic rational quality, which of course it isn't. So what came up subsequently in this discussion was very interesting, was the Eastern attitude, let's just say the attitude in the Bhagavad Gita. So when Arjuna refuses to fight so he can avoid sinning, Krishna says to Arjuna that he in fact should fight, not to achieve a certain outcome, but because it's his duty. And he tells Arjuna that if he should not fight, all he's doing is trying to escape from these sinful reactions. And what is better to do is to fight as a duty, but you fight with detachment. And that attitude is beyond the world of objects, in this case, beyond the world of all these bodies, and some of them might be his relatives, which is why he didn't want to, one of the reasons he didn't want to fight. But this attitude is transcendent, and that transcendent attitude is the attitude that a warrior should have. And what a warrior should do, by virtue of the fact that his duty is to be a warrior, is to engage in battle even if it means death. So the illusory aspect isn't the tragedy of war or the tragedy of Hiroshima. It's that what happens on earth, even if it is death, while it is materially real, is not ultimate reality. And that's what makes it illusory. No, on one hand, it's not illusory. On the other hand, it is illusory because it isn't ultimate reality. There's a reality beyond that. Maybe you could say, and I'm going to borrow from Uber Boyo, a really good concept. Maybe you could say that this material reality is an interface to the ultimate reality. Ultimate reality is being part of the whole, the one, the tat tvam asi, you are that. So in a way you could say death does not kill you because we are beyond life or death. in this way of understanding. And what you could say then is that quality creates and is in all things. So even if your body dies, quality remains always and forever. And while this is no solace to a rationalist, when you contemplate the reality of death, which we're all going to go through, it actually makes a lot of sense, because by contemplating this reality of death, and realizing that whatever form you take is still made of and created by quality, allows a transcendent understanding that takes us out of this world of subjects and objects. So tat tvam asi, you are quality, no matter what physical or ephemeral form you take. So that also reminded me of something I've brought up before, which is this passage in Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis wrote Mere Christianity either during or shortly after World War II. And the escapability of war, of course, was front and center. So how does a soldier, especially a Christian soldier in this case, reconcile with killing? And that is by his attitude, exactly the same as in the Bhagavad Gita. The killing of the enemy is a duty to vanquish the evil actions of what the enemy either has done or represents, the greater evil, empire, Nazi Germany, in the case of C.S. Lewis. But while you denounce the actions and while you're willing to kill because of these evil actions, the man himself you forgive. And forgiveness in Christianity is similar to the detachment of the Eastern religions in the sense that duty or moral law is right action. And for C.S. Lewis, he points to moral law. It's right action here in the material world. But as Krishna said, we detach from the outcomes of our actions. We're detached from the killing itself and concentrate on the duty, the greater good of this, what on the surface seems like a terrible action. So this is very much like what C.S. Lewis proposes, that the soldier should not kill out of resentment or hatred or some bloodlust, but hatred of the action of the enemy, which is the duty, or in the case of C.S. Lewis, the moral law. So I want to read something from C.S. Lewis. Remember, we Christians think man lives forever. Therefore, what really matters is those little marks or twists on the central, inside part of the soul, which we are going to turn it, in the long run, into a heavenly or hellish creature. We may kill if necessary, but we must not hate and enjoy hating. We may punish if necessary, but we must not enjoy it. In other words, something inside us, the feeling of resentment, the feeling that wants to get one's own back, must simply be killed. I do not mean that anyone can decide this moment that he will never feel it anymore. That's not how things happen. I mean that every time it bobs its head up, day after day, year after year, all our lives long, we must hit it on the head. Krishna says a very similar thing. He says, as soon as you get caught up in all this material stuff, you've got to reconcentrate. You've got to take your concentration, transcend this, and concentrate on the Krishna consciousness. So, and I want to say something about living forever. The afterlife, or the living forever of Christianity, needs to be carefully interpreted. But I propose that it represents the transcendent nature, similar for Christians as the Krishna consciousness represents for Hindus. Also, killing of that self-indulgence, of revenge, is a continual practice, as is the practice of disengaging from earthly outcome and concentrating on Krishna. So I want to leave you with one final thought, or quote. If you gaze into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. So put down that phone and go for a walk, preferably up a hill, or if you have access to one, up a mountain. So I hope that made sense, and I will see you next time.